Welcome back to another episode of the Root and Rise podcast. I'm your host, Brianne, and I am here with a very special guest, Rowan, talking about bridging gaps in the community and finding community to bridge gaps. If you haven't listened to my episode on how to end the chore wars, dividing household chores evenly and getting more support at home from your husband, live-in partner, or boyfriend, I recommend you do that next because in that episode, I shared 3 actionable tips, including the very practice that I use in my own home for fair labor division. It was my introduction to the Bridging the Gap community group, and I talked about my own personal experience implementing some of those practices within my home. Bridging the Gap community group is a movement of gender equity through community. Rowan Whitehead is the founder of this online community, which includes over 64,000 members at the time this is published, though you'll notice it was at 40,000 members when we recorded. The group is growing quickly and it has a hefty resource section. It's a Facebook community that you can join today, and I recommend that you do because it provides support, encouragement, education, and practical tips when you feel stuck carrying too much of the load or when the gaps feel almost impossible to close. This community truly strives to help everybody feel heard and valued. You'll find the link to join in my episode description. In this episode, Rowan and I will talk about community. Finding community when you feel isolated or alone, especially in motherhood. And not just any community, but a supportive and intentional community, striving to bridge the gaps that are impacting you in your own life, and managing the anger, resentment, and other emotions that can come along with noticing, calling out, and trying to bridge gaps, along with overcoming internalized misogyny, addressing some questions and comments submitted on my community survey form, and so much more. That survey form will be linked for you as well so you can join the conversation. And look, I'm all for talking about these topics openly in the home, but you might want to use earbuds for this one. We do use a little colorful language from time to time, but trust me, it's worth it because you're not going to want to miss this one. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce to you my guest of honor, Rowan Whitehead.
My name is Rowan and I live in Cardiff, which is in Wales in the UK, where it rains a lot typically. And I've got 2 children. So my son is 9.5 and my girl just turned 6. And I co-parent them with their dad, so about half the time each. I've got a little flat that I'm trying to fill of plants and self-help books and candles and lovely things. So Bridging the Gap is this sort of movement of gender equity through community. So it started as a Facebook group, which now has 42,500 members, which is pretty daunting but amazing. I've got a public Facebook page and an Instagram, which started more recently. So I'm building up a following and building up content for those. And then I've also got a Patreon that I only started a couple of months back. So I offer different resources and content through the Patreon. We have a Discord chat, which is just a really small group of people that want to talk in depth and support each other through bridging gaps. And then I do resources on a monthly theme and we work on collaborations and question and answer sessions with people that have relevant experience. So it's all just about peer support, bringing people together to share our experience and our knowledge. And I kind of use my more alternative background. So I've got a lot of experience in aerial and circus and festivals and protests. And I try and draw all that in and bring it all together with an amazing group of moderators who put so much work and care in.
That's one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on. I loved the way the group was addressing gaps in a way that wasn't aggressive towards, the people who are not filling the gaps. And I think that while there is space and justification for the anger and, maybe that incites that aggressiveness, it's hard to get that message across. Just your admins and mods, like you guys are all really great at humanizing people, meeting them where they're at, having compassion. And that's something that's so rare to see in Facebook groups. I just you've created such a safe and supportive place on the internet with strangers, and that is so rare.
So they are a lovely team, and they do put so much in, and they do really care, which I do think is quite unique in that we do really try and craft those comments at every single post approval, which most groups won't do. But yeah, it's because we want to make sure the group is staying on our ethos and staying true to our beliefs, and also acknowledge every single person's situation, because obviously there's a lot of similarities, but also they're all people people who are coming here because they're feeling vulnerable or feeling isolated and alone. And so we want to make sure that they are feeling heard and valued. And it is so tricky because, like you say, there's definitely a place for anger and frustration and feeling like people's behavior is totally unacceptable. But also it's about, I guess, trying to let that frustration out and then work on how do we move forward and where are we going to go from here, which is why we try and have very clear gap rants where we know they're not really looking for advice. They do just want to air those frustrations and feelings. But then we try and move on to tips or ideas or perspectives and be like, right, you don't have to stay in this place because that's going to eat you up eventually, isn't it? We have to find ways to try and move past the anger and channel it into these kind of positive changes.
Yeah, I definitely think that intention shows. I even just love having the hashtag, like the Gap Rant, having everything tagged. Like it makes people mindful of why they're showing up, why they're posting, what they're asking, what they're seeking. I think that starts off the post from a very intentional place. And yeah, it's just very rare.
You need them to keep this space safe and on purpose.
And on purpose. That is very accurate. What made you start this community then? And when did you start it?
I started it in 2019 in April, so 4 years ago. And I kind of started it out of this just real frustration at seeing these imbalances in my own relationship and in my friends' relationships and in Facebook groups just over and over and over. And, seeing a lot of funny memes or moans or rants, but it also being still very accepted. So many things of, oh, this is what my man child did today, or I've got 3 kids in the house, or or I really hate that I'm ending up doing all the tidying, but it just keeps happening. So many of these same stories, but it's still being very sort of normal. And I was like, it's just, it started, this frustration was really building up. So it was like, I need to do something if I can to stop it just being this loop of feeling frustrated and fed up, moaning to my friends about it or on groups about it and hearing the same things, but not anything actually changing. And it was actually, I don't know if you know The Guilty Feminist and Deborah Frances White. She's a UK comedian and activist. I started listening to a lot of her podcasts. She was talking about how, you cannot tackle the whole of the patriarchy or all of society's issues. You can't fix everything. You can just try and pick one small thing and try and work on that. And so I was like, maybe this is one small thing. It's obviously not a small thing, as I found out as well. It's very complicated and big, but it was something I thought maybe I could try and do because I was brought up by a very strong feminist, and I was always brought up that men and women are equal, we can all do the same things, there's nothing girls can do that boys can't do. I was always a really strong believer in that. So the fact that that when I had children and went on maternity and then phased back to work, that I also then fell into some of those gender stereotypes and fell into doing a lot more of the mental load and things at home. And that was with a partner who really did want to help and was really hands-on. So it's even obviously worse with those that actually are actively trying not to be part of the equitable relationship. But so even with that, you kind of, from you're pregnant and you're reading the books, it just seems like it's so normal for us to be taking on everything and to be doing all of that mental load and to be the household managers, but then also now often work full-time or part-time as well. And it's absolutely impossible to achieve, but it still seems like that's what we have to do, like mums are martyrs, mums never stop, mums are robots. And even when I was younger, I remember, internalizing that and being like, I'm not sure if I want kids or if I want to grow up, because it just seems like they have no time and energy, and that doesn't seem very fun. And then when you're pregnant, people are kind of like, oh, you can still do all the exciting things you were planning on doing, you can still do that. And it's like, well, you can, but it's a lot harder, and society is really stacked against you in that. So yes, that was quite long-winded, but so I was getting really frustrated with those conversations with friends and online, and I was like, I want to start this group that is looking to actively change it. We can challenge the things, we can point them out, we can try and change them in ourselves, and we can try and work out tips or ways to improve it, as well as noticing it and being unhappy with it. So it started off just, a few of my friends and me posting a share once a day or a little article or discussion prompt. And then, they would invite a few friends and in all the groups I was in, if I was allowed, I'd be saying, come and join this group to talk about these things. And so it was slowly growing. And then obviously during the pandemic and lockdown is when it really started to take off, because everybody was online more. And obviously the whole situation for women especially was getting even worse. We were having to try and homeschool while working full-time from home a lot. And it was just, and take on all of that. So that's when it really did start to get busy. And we kind of, once we hit 10,000, that was it. It just grew exponentially. And I was not linking anymore because everybody was linking in all the groups that they knew. And it was just, spreading into all of these different platforms. And it's been a roller coaster, but it's amazing. And I feel privileged every day to have started and be part of something that has now taken on such a huge life and is having such an impact.
It's so inspiring. And to think that once you said 2019, I was like, wow, what a time to come in and like have a moment to stabilize yourself and what you're building before being incredibly needed during the pandemic. You stepped in right when you were needed. And I think that's beautiful that like you felt the call and you answered it. And look what you've done. I know you've impacted my life positively. And like you said, I have a partner who's willing, and it does change. You mentioned that you had made some really powerful connections and long-lasting friendships through this group. I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah, I think that is one of the best things for me about the group, is just how these completely spontaneous connections, or people reach out that just then make you go, oh, we can do this, or oh, that's a new thing. And it's just, you never know what's around the corner with it, because there are so many people working in so many different ways in similar areas that are suddenly going to be like you with the podcast, and then just being like, oh, I haven't heard of this, but it sounds brilliant, and checking it out and being like, this is definitely something similar and got the same ethos, so it would be lovely to connect. And yeah, things like that, they just happen quite regularly, which is so exciting for me. And so like, I love talking to people and I love connecting with people. That's what really does make me feel fulfilled. So I think that is what's really one of the things that's been very special. I think it was like, must have been about a year after the group started, maybe somewhere into the pandemic there, and there was a live stream advertised with the Guilty Feminist that was about the bill against protesting that was being discussed here in the UK. And actually it was quite small still, the group, so there was only 2 people who said they were interested in getting a ticket and sort of listening along with me, so one of which has become one of my best friends now and is an admin in the group as well. And I went up to Scotland to meet them last year at a Guilty Feminist concert, so it was such a lovely connection there to like yeah, we first started talking through that, and then it was maybe a couple of years later, traveled all the way up to Scotland to meet them, and just been an incredible backstage support. It's really amazing that now I couldn't live without them. Like really just lots of support backstage and lots of kind of solidarity and just talking and trusting someone you can really trust that you didn't even know to start with, apart from through the group. The whole tagline is gender equity through community. So it's like we are doing this together and we're working on it together. My core aims are to try and make a difference to people and help them find ways to change their lives and to improve that equity. And it was to give other marginalized genders people's opportunities, because there's still so many barriers in the way for mothers and carers and marginalized genders. The injustice of that just gets to me so much, that they've got so much to give in all these different ways, and it is harder to find opportunities and to get paid their worth and to work around children without that childcare, or with being the default parent. So that is one of my really core aims that I'm really trying to stick to, is offering out as many opportunities to other people in the group or other people who are interested in the same values as I can, because it's peer support and it's people helping each other and learning from each other. So I never wanted it to be I'm a leader and I'm teaching you the ways or anything. I wanted it to be, we're coming together, we're sharing knowledge, we're sharing resources, and we're sharing what worked for us and what didn't work for us, so that other people don't have to do as much labor in that, and we can move forward together. Just grows us all together, isn't it? And it's really about trying to be intersectional. We're not going to be equal until we're all equal, and we can't only think some of us are going to find equity and that's fine. We have to all try and work towards it together, I think, using everything that we can.
I would love to hear more about like the impact that bridging gaps has. I know that you mentioned getting paid fairly and having some more free time, not taking on as much of the mental load. But as we're introducing people into this movement and this concept, some people might not be as aware of it. They may not even be aware. I wasn't aware. I kind of joined the group being like, oh, this seems like my kind of people. And I had no idea, the depth of what I was stepping into. And I know a lot of the times when we're stepping into something so overwhelmingly large and something that feels like we're going against the flow, it can be really overwhelming. So let's start with some of the benefits. Like, what do you see personally in your life, or what do you see within the group of the impact that Bridging Gaps is having actively?
I think some of the biggest impacts it has on people is that it's just showing them over and over again, what's not acceptable, healthy, good, positive behavior. So many people are in situations that, have slowly got imbalanced or has been modeled to them. So they thought it was, normal and fine to come into the group and suddenly, see every post that has a maybe similar situation, having people on it saying, no, this is not okay. No, you deserve more. No, it doesn't have to be like this, is a huge thing, I think, for people to suddenly be like, oh, okay, this doesn't have to be the status quo, and actually maybe I could be happier and maybe things could change. So just that kind of evidence that there is another way, I think, is important. And also that solidarity of seeing that many other people are in the same situations can often be very validating, because people might think I'm the only person that's feeling like this, and I shouldn't be feeling frustrated and burnt out because everyone else is just managing to get on with it. There is so much toxic positivity sometimes online where, people are just pretending they're fine even if they are really struggling. And we really try to challenge that in the group and be like, it's hard, acknowledge when it's hard. That doesn't mean that we don't love our children, that doesn't mean that we regret our choices, but actually we don't always need to caveat that, because in our society it's ridiculously difficult to be in an imbalanced relationship and to be a parent or a carer in those kinds of situations. So I think it's just really trying to hold space for those who are struggling and be like, yeah, we see you, we know that it's almost impossible to get through things sometimes. So yeah, I think there's that initial kind of solidarity, that recognition, and that challenging. And then I just think we hear a lot about just those small changes as people start to reframe in their heads, that it's not helping, it's doing their share of the chores, and it's not babysitting, it's looking after their own children if it's a dad's, and it's those small changes that start to come through. And no, I deserve equal lions, or I deserve to go for a walk this week as well. I deserve a night out because my partner gets a couple every week. So we do hear a lot, like you say, those gap wins or those like kind of positive posts and positive partner posts, where even just a sort of change in attitude can have really big effects. It slowly builds. And I just think, actually, when you boil it down, bridging the gap is so much about building that self-esteem and knowing that, you're worth respect, and you're worth rest, and you're worth being able to do more than constant housework and constant cooking and planning and everything. So it's about building that self-esteem and really trying to understand that we are deserving of more, and then finding those ways to put down boundaries, or ways to redivide it, ways to make all of that invisible labor that you've just automatically been doing visible. So we talk about that so much, just, whether it's verbally, whether it's writing it down, whether it's chore charts or audits, it's making it all visible. It's being like, look how much I'm bloody doing. This needs to change. We do hear a lot about small changes and about how people's eyes have been opened and about how they've really heard and seen very similar situations. And that can often get lost sometimes in, the huge amount of more extreme that can't be changed by those actions, and that, do need them to actually look at signposting to other resources and making safe plans and talking to professionals. And it's hard to kind of balance that in the group, because every now and again we'll get a post like that and you'll get loads of comments of people saying the same, saying that it's impacted their lives. And you remember, oh yeah, as upsetting and devastating a lot of these situations are, there is so many others that are just, making these slow changes and thanking the group for it and saying, I wouldn't have realized how unacceptable things were before I came and started reading everybody else's stories.
And I don't know if you got a chance to read through some of the responses on the forums, but my heart was so warm reading what people have gained. I mean, just you saying that self-worth is, or self-esteem is, the number one thing you focus on. I'm looking at one where somebody says the self-worth and the strength to break free of conformity that perpetuates gender norms. Look what you did. I know. I also really loved that you brought up not using the terms like babysitting, or one that I felt so called out on, and but would have never realized within the group is like when I ask my husband, "Can you help me with this?" and realizing I need to not say help, finding different ways to word it. And our words matter. When we use these different words like help and babysitting, we are implying internally and externally that things aren't equal and that things are different for us as mothers or partners who are the default parents. And I see one on here that says the specific words to ask for what I need. And I learned that I'm not wrong or crazy for wanting more help with the house and the kids in life. You're making a big impact. I included that on there because I think it's important for everybody to see the impact we're having. It's hard to get lost in such heavy work. And when you are so passionate and invested in something like that, you're going to probably hold on to the negative stories and the situations that didn't turn out as we would have hoped and that we're fighting for. I see some of that with the domestic violence work that I do, and it can be really disheartening. And
you just feel like you can never do enough, don't you? But you just, when you hear some of the situations, or just like, yeah, you just want to be able to do more, but you have to hold on to the fact that we all need to do our little parts. And
yep. And we can't fix the whole world. I know that's one thing. I feel the weight of the world sometimes, and it's enough to like debilitate me a little bit. Like I need to just pick my one thing. I love that you started out with that too, and finding a way to put your energy towards something positive. That's just, it says a lot about you as a person. You were talking about when we're bridging gaps and we're seeing people who are having situations that aren't 50-50. I know one of the questions that someone in the community asked was, is there a way of bridging gaps when some gaps due to work commitments will never be anything near 50-50? I'm curious what you recommend with that. I also live in a military community, and so there are times where, you know, it's not going to be 50-50. So I see it from my perspective, but I'm curious from other perspectives and just a general sense, what would you recommend?
You know, it's that idea that if one person is working more hours in paid labor, then obviously they aren't going to be able to do as much of the unpaid labor as if the other person's not working. And that is, you know, that real disparity is often why we don't look at equality. We do look at equity, because there is that difference. And, you know, equality would maybe mean doing 50-50 on cooking, cleaning, childcare, everything. And that's very rarely going to be possible, because we're never, or very rarely, working exactly the same hours or have exactly the same skills or exactly the same capacity. It's every situation is unique. So it's looking at that idea of equity. So, you know, in that situation, I would be recommending starting off with something like a time audit, or jotting down an estimate of how much downtime each person is getting and trying to make that as equal as possible. So if it turns out they are doing about the same amounts of paid and unpaid labor, then you need to look at other ways, what plastic balls can drop. You know, you'd need to look at other ways of bridging gaps that maybe isn't through the relationship. But you will so often find that the person who is working is getting more time off, because they're like, oh, I need a bit more rest because I'm working, or, you know, I need to be doing this, I need to chill out after. So then it is really trying to bring home that point that unpaid labor is still working hard, and it's still exhausting. And especially if you are with kids for long periods of time, you still need those breaks. That everything outside of those paid or unpaid working hours should be split as equitably as possible. So, you know, if someone's at work 9 to 5, then the kids are that other person's responsibility while they're at home 9 to 5. But from 5 till bedtime or whatever, the thing should be split as if you've both had that full day of work, because you've both been doing stuff, you know. So it could be like, you do bedtime and I'll cook and do this, or I'll cook and then you clean, and then we'll both tidy up together so we can both sit down at the same time. So it's those little things, like a lot of people do go with, we don't rest until we both rest. So we make sure all the tasks are done, we make sure everything's clear, and then you can both sit down and chill, rather than it being like the person who's come home from work gets to sit and chill first. So yeah, it's just finding those ways that it's still a joint responsibility, and it's still not that the person who's working doesn't input at all, because they're still living in the house and they're still a parent or a partner, and they still do need to have some input there in those times when they're not at work. Or there might be things they can do in their breaks while they're at work, because, you know, if you're at home with young children, you don't get that kind of break, do you? You don't get to sit and have a warm cup of coffee or go to the toilet in peace. So there might be some mental load tasks they can take on. And then, you know, after that, it's looking at what maybe is societal pressure rather rather than, what actually needs to be done. So what things can be taken off the to-do list, what's the housework that maybe doesn't need to be done quite as frequently, what support networks can you find around you for the times when the partner is working so much, and what guilt and pressure can you take off yourself. So there are the societal gaps as well as the relationship gaps. So I think it's kind of a combination of making sure it's actually equitable in terms of free time and in terms of tasks done at home, and then what plastic balls can you let drop, what things don't need to be done quite as often, what things do you think a parent does or a house person does or a stay-at-home parent does that maybe don't actually need to be done, and how can you prioritize that rest and that free time and having things for yourself, because it's really important.
What kind of support networks do you bring in for yourself when things aren't feeling 50-50? Because I know that is where we need to get creative, right? Because it doesn't fit the traditional ideal of what your support network should be like with children in a family. And that's not ideal for anybody. I don't know anybody really who fits into that traditional role, but I'm curious what kind of creative ways you find to build that support for yourself.
It's really tough, isn't it? Like, yeah, it's hard to find that now because we are so much less connected a lot of the time, aren't we? And we are meant to be self-reliant or not ask for help or whatever. And it's really bizarre that we've put ourselves into these kind of boxes where we feel like we need to do it alone. So yeah, support network is something I'm still kind of working on because I don't have that much family nearby. I do have a couple of people that will come and have the kids every now and again, or will bring me some nice treats or some food, or, do that kind of thing. So that's lovely. And I have some people in the school that we swap childcare every now and again. So we will look after each other's children when we need to. And I think that is something that's really important and can be built on for lots of people, is just, it doesn't need to be good friends. It just needs to be people who have kids in the same year or in the same location. And, somebody to be brave enough to just reach out and go, I'm struggling. I need help. Do you need help? Can we maybe go shopping together so we're not on our own? Could we maybe have a play date after school? It takes those people to be brave enough to face that kind of maybe rejection and say, look, we could connect up here and we can do some things. And I think, that is so important because it just takes away that alone. And that's one of the hardest things, obviously, when you're struggling or when you're feeling overwhelmed, is feeling on your own with it. So if you can find those friends or connections within the school run or even online, there's quite often local Facebook groups or play groups, anything like that, but try and actually find ones that are a bit more authentic and that you're actually being like, right, I do need support here and I do need maybe some help with this thing because I can't drive. So you could do that, but then maybe I could cook for you because I'm better at cooking, and find those skills that you can share. So I think that's really something would be really great for us to get back to, is a bit more of that community village type feel, and that sharing skills and doing things together, and and just reaching out to family more when we can and being that bit more vulnerable, because we all have this kind of conditioning that says that if we say that we're finding it hard or we're struggling, that means we're failing and we're not doing a great job as a parent or being a great adult, functioning in life. And that's just not true. It's actually, it takes a lot of strength to ask for help and to say when you're struggling with something, and nobody can do everything on their own. We're all going to have things that would be so much easier or possible if we had that support. And people do enjoy supporting each other, and it just takes those people to reach out, and then if people can help, I think they will, and then they'll feel better about maybe asking for it in return, because it becomes more of a reciprocal thing then. So it's not that you're just taking from other people. You give when you can and they give when they can, and you find those connections a bit more. So that's something I do try and bring up a lot in the group. And it's hard for people. They just go, oh, I couldn't ask for help, and they might say no. And it's like, yeah, they might, because everybody's tired and struggling, and it won't be about you. It will just be about they haven't got the capacity right now. We can keep asking and we can keep kind of opening ourselves up a bit. You'll hopefully find that one person who's like, actually, yeah, I can do this to help you. And then maybe next week you can help me here. So a lot of it comes down to those boundaries again, and being able to know what you can give and what you need. But having those people that you really can turn to is so important. And often you find that online as well. A lot of the times when I'm struggling now, it will be people online that I will speak to, and they will give me a pep talk or listen to me have a moan or give me a bit of advice. And I think that can really help us when we're feeling alone as well, especially those who maybe are home a lot with young children. Then reaching out online and finding those people they can actually be open and vulnerable with is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Just brings us back to the importance of community, which is what is so beautiful about bridging the gap community. I know being a stay-at-home mom and not having support, sometimes I can't call people, sometimes I can't ask for help verbally. There's too much crying and screaming, and I'm answering the same question over and over and over. But I can go online and I can search and I can write and I can type, and I have access to a group that feels safe and supportive. And that's just the beauty of online. It's wonderful to have that local support. And I appreciate hearing those creative ways that you found it. And I love hearing the balance in it, because my guilt instantly went, oh, I couldn't, but you're right. It's, you say, oh, I am good at cooking and I can help you with that. And it doesn't always need to be a return thing, but I love that you found creative ways, because I see in my own self and the community that people feel like if they can't fit into that ideal mold, they should just give up. And it's like, no, let's get creative. Like, support doesn't need to be your in-laws or grandparents or partner. It can be daycare. It can be, a gym where you go and get some time to yourself to shower and you use their childcare for a couple of hours. Like, you can be really creative with it. And I love that you've done that. You were talking about what plastic balls I can drop. And that was such a beautiful visual for me, because you think about having all these balls in the air and they're going to break. But you're like, as soon as you said, what plastic balls can you let go? I'm like, oh my God, they're plastic. It's fine. Let it go. You don't need to clean the playroom every single day. That's a plastic ball. I love that. And I just really wanted to draw attention to that. What kind of plastic balls do you choose in your life that aren't as important, that you can let go in those moments where you feel really overloaded or overwhelmed?
I'll just start by saying that I did not invent the glass ball, plastic ball analogy. I'm not sure
It's,
entirely where it came from, but
I love that. That's okay. I'll Google it and I'll put a little side note right here.
it's been around in the group a lot, and I've seen various different articles that talk about it, and it's something that we've adopted in the group as a good way to look at things.
I've not seen that yet. Okay.
Yeah, have you not?
I've spent hours digging in the group. That's how much resources and valuable information. I still haven't come across a plastic ball yet. One of the questions from the community was the best ways to challenge internalized narratives.
Yeah, how not to internalize the narratives. I think you can't really say you can't. I think we've already internalized them by this point, and by teenagehood, or even younger in a lot of ways, before we're born in some ways, that all those ideas of gender are already being put on us. So we've already internalized them in a lot of ways. So it's more about recognizing that and about continually trying to challenge that and bring yourself out of it. So, I'm not an expert on psychology or those mental things or anything, but for me, the kind of work I've done is, about starting to see those patterns by talking about them with other people, by discussing them, by looking for them in daily life, and then just constantly having to be like, actually, no, that's not the only reason that we're here is to serve others and help others, or, no, that's not something that women have to do automatically. You have to kind of keep interrupting those cycles and keep rewiring your brains to think, this is conditioning. This isn't actually real. And, this is really bizarre. Why does my gender identity at birth mean that I'm going to be better at cooking than men? It's keep challenging those things that when you actually look at them are pretty ridiculous a lot of the time.
But we just don't take the time to question,
it's just so normalized that you're just like, oh yeah, okay, that must be it. And then you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Why do pink razors cost more than blue razors?
Yeah, no. Just the awareness. Yeah, you're right. Having the awareness. And I think just sitting in a space like your group is enough to bring that awareness. There were things you mentioned a lot in the group and on this interview, making the invisible work visible. And I think just having a group where other people are doing it and other people are showing how they speak about it gives you a pattern of, the same words, the same vocabulary, same behaviors, and being able to see other people standing up for themselves and calling these things out gives you the words and the confidence, and
you need that language, and you need to know that it is actually a thing, and then you can start to internalize new things and take on new things. And we had a Q&A last week with Gemma Hartley, who wrote this book Fed Up, Redefining Emotional Labor, in 2017, and she was saying that was when mental load and invisible labor really started becoming part of everyday vocabulary and people started really becoming aware of it. Now it is very much a thing. Most people do know what mental load is, and most people know that women or marginalized genders tend to hold so much more of the mental load. Now we are all starting to slowly, hopefully, realize that we can challenge that and we can change that and we can redivide the mental load a bit more. So there's new things coming out, and you just have to be willing, I think, to do that research, to find it, and willing to face that fact that, you know, we have got internalized misogyny. We're all going to have that, and that sometimes we are perpetuating those gaps ourselves, and that's not our fault. You know, that's not our fault at all. That's societal conditioning in us, and that's the patriarchy wanting to keep people in those roles because it works for society. But if we can kind of look at that without feeling attacked and feeling defensive and be like, oh yeah, that's actually not a great thing to think, then we can start learning and we can start opening ourselves up to all these new possibilities, which, you know, brings a big freedom with it, I think.
I completely agree. I mean, it gives us the freedom and space to have this conversation and be able to share that with others, and for you to be able to work in this community. One of the questions that I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer was, how do you bring up a lack of respect in a way that won't make your spouse defensive?
You know, it's a tricky one because, like we say, we cannot control other people. We cannot make them react in a different way than they do. What I'd mostly say is that there is going to be some defensiveness to start with, because generally those who are in that place of privilege, you know, they don't want to give it up. They're not going to suddenly be like, oh yeah, of course, we're going to completely change and rebalance things, because, you know, they are in a position a lot of the time where they are benefiting. And that's not to say that, you know, that the patriarchy isn't damaging and harming them, because it absolutely is. And, you know, it's not good for anybody at all. But a lot of the damage maybe in the conditioning is a lot deeper. So from their point of view, at the moment, they're in a better situation kind of practically or whatever. And they are going to be a bit like, oh, what do you mean I'm not doing enough? Or what do you mean I'm not doing half? Because they just don't know. They just haven't experienced it. They haven't got that lived experience to be like, this is how hard it is. So I do think that, you know, it's okay to be aware that if we first have this conversation, there may be some defensiveness to start with, and that as hard as it is, we have to try not to take that on and be like, you know, I can hear you disagree, I can hear you don't think that's true, but this is how I feel. I am not willing to put up with doing this anymore. What are the ways that we are going to look at this? Can we put it down properly, and, you know, so that we can see exactly how much each person is doing? Or can we just look at a few ways to make me feel less frustrated and exhausted right now? And, you know, you really do hope that if you're in a partnership where the other person is supposed to love you, they are not going to want to see you struggling and burnt out and exhausted. And they are going to be like, okay, well, there might be some things that I can do here. And, you know, that's not always the case. And if they really won't look at it, then you can't force them. And that's when you're going to have to look at what your boundaries are and what you want to accept and, you know, what your final moves are. But a lot of the time, I think there will be that defensiveness, there will be that conditioning coming in. And if they can try and move past that, and it doesn't become a battle and a kind of real butting of heads, then you can look at how to change things in a way that doesn't make it feel like exactly it's all their fault, because nobody wants to hear this is completely all your fault and my life is awful and it's all because of you. So it's, you know, it is trying to meet them halfway and be like, you know, I know that I've fallen into these roles and I know that we've been pushed into these patterns by society and everything, but we can see that it's not okay. We can see that I'm also working, or I'm doing all of this, and that it's too much. How can we change it? Just try and open that dialogue, I guess. And when we were talking about it with Gemma, she was saying it's ideally done before we get to the end of our tethers, but that often isn't the case, because we push it down and we're like, we shouldn't be saying we're unhappy, or we should just be able to do it all. So again, it's maybe trying to find those times when we're not so frustrated and so tired that it does come out as a huge attack. Find that time when it's a bit more, we just need to talk about this, we're both feeling okay, rather than when you're absolutely exhausted.
Yes.
And then trying to find ways to start communicating. I think, you know, it's just so much about communication. It's about us learning how to communicate what's too much and where our boundaries are and what we actually need, because we're just not used to doing that. And it is absolutely on them to then step up and be like, okay, I need to contribute more, I do need to do more, and try, because otherwise it's not going to work in the relationship for too long, is it? Because you're just letting the other person down. So, you know, I wish I had a magic wand, but from what we've seen in the group and things, I think that's a lot of what we can hopefully try and do, is just meet in the middle a bit and just get that communication going.
Mm-hmm. And I think your group provides the tools needed to communicate. I think about stepping into that moment when you're emotional and you're reactive and your brain capacity isn't functioning at its fullest. You don't have those words and tools to pull from. You're not going to be putting out a message to your partner that is going to be received well. There's a lot of that anger, resentment, that frustration, the overwhelm that's going to be coming out in all of your words. I love that your group has given people the words to speak in those moments that have already been well thought out, researched, intentionally chosen, and they have been modeled within the group. Even just you giving your answer, you modeled exactly what you would say in that situation. And that is, I mean, somebody said the words to be able to help themselves and advocate for themselves. People don't understand how much words can impact you, and being able to have the right words in the right order to say in the right moment when you can't come up with them on your own is so powerful. And I thank you on behalf of anybody who is benefiting from that, because I benefit from it. I have some new words that I've learned and new ways of just moving through the world and seeing things differently. I've always strived to have this lifestyle and way of living, especially having two boys, wanting them raised in a world where they see that is important to me, but I still didn't understand the depth of it. And I'm so grateful to have you here. I think that we have so much more that we can get into. There were so many great and specific questions on here. We could do a fun just like Q&A for the group to answer their questions. I'm so impressed with what you're doing, and I'm so proud of you. I know you don't need my words of pride, but I just think
Thank
what
you
you're
so
doing is
much.
really powerful, and I'm really excited that you gave me your time and are willing to share it with my audience, because I see the benefit of it and I've lived the benefit of it, and you are actively improving people's lives every single day. You have hundreds of posts. That's how many people that are getting support and advice, and you're not even accounting for the people who are just reading silently and still gaining.
I do need your words, because it does really help, when you do get a lot of sometimes criticism in the group or whatever from people who are upset or triggered, or just so many hard stories, that having that positiveness and having people sort of seeing that impact and wanting to celebrate it is, but yeah, it's really important.
It's
Nice.
important to hold that in a heavy space,
Yeah,
because you
it
create
is.
space for the heavy, and you don't, you're not coming at it with toxic positivity, but you deserve real positivity. And there
Yeah.
needs to be space for that, which is also why I love your positive partner posts, because
Exactly, they are really important, and you always get people going, oh, that's just a bare minimum, and it's like, well, actually for this person it's not, it's a little win, it's positive, and we're gonna damn well celebrate it, because everybody is at different points in their journey, and they need to be brought up a little bit.
No matter where you're at in your journey, this conversation doesn't have to stop here. Rowan and I have a survey ready and waiting for any and all of your questions that you might have after this episode. I also recommend continuing this conversation in the Bridging the Gap community group on Facebook. You'll find the links to both in the episode description. I know that it takes courage to step into community, and I want to commend you for taking that first step. Just listening to this conversation is stepping into that community, and I'm honored that you were here with me today. So thank you. I hope that we provided you some insight, some education, maybe a little bit of hope, and possibly a new community. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.